They didn't walk away from God. They walked away from everything that tried to trap him. You've seen it. The strongest seekers, the ones who once worshipped with fire in their bones, now sit in silence, away from the pews. You wonder, have they lost faith? No, my friend, they've found something purer, something that cannot be choreographed, scheduled, or commercialized. Let's uncover the truth no one dares to speak out loud, why the chosen ones have left the church, and why their departure may be the holiest act of all. Step 1. Disconnection between spirit and structure. There comes a moment in every awakened soul's journey when they can no longer ignore the aching gap between what is sacred and what has become systemized. The chosen ones, those with sensitive spirits and an innate pull toward deeper meaning, begin to feel the friction. At first, it's subtle, a quiet discomfort in the sanctuary, a question that arises during the sermon but is met with practiced clichés rather than spiritual clarity, a holy longing unfulfilled by organized repetition. Over time, the gap widens until the rituals they once revered now feel like echoes in a hollow hall. Something once alive now stands embalmed. The institution speaks often of God, but the chosen feel his silence within those walls. Not because he is absent, but because he is not confined. The spirit that once moved them to tears now feels caged behind rehearsed schedules, color-coded programs, and a structure too afraid to let go of control. And the chosen, they begin to wonder, has the church fallen more in love with its structure than with its spirit? For those whose inner world burns with spiritual sensitivity, this is not just a passing phase of disillusionment. It is a breaking, a holy rupture. They sit quietly in the pews, watching the system function efficiently, volunteers serving, worship leaders performing, messages timed to the minute. But beneath the flawless coordination, something is missing. The breath of the Spirit, the unpredictability of divine encounter, the trembling sense that heaven has entered the room. And when that presence is no longer felt, the structure becomes noise. It becomes impressive, but not intimate. The chosen ones don't despise structure. They despise the replacement of spirit with structure. They grieve not because they are rebellious, but because they remember what it felt like when God was the center, not the budget, not the branding, not the celebrity pastor. They remember prayer meetings where the room shook with repentance, not just emotional music. They remember when leaders washed feet, not built platforms. And in that memory, a sorrow grows. The sorrow of a bride watching the groom be forgotten at his own wedding. This disconnection, this chasm between spirit and system, creates a crisis of faith, not in God, but in the place that claimed to house him. The more the church polishes its image, the more the chosen ones feel unseen. Not because they want attention, but because they long for authenticity. They crave a return to the sacred, to the stillness, the fire, the wonder. But the machinery of religion keeps spinning, often too loud to hear the whisper of the Spirit that once called them there in the first place. Step 2. Performance over presence. The soul does not hunger for entertainment, it hungers for encounter. Yet the modern church, in its effort to stay relevant, has unknowingly begun to perform God rather than host him. For the chosen ones, the seekers, the spiritually attuned, the ones who crave divine nearness, this shift is not only obvious, it is heartbreaking. They walk into sanctuaries that resemble concert halls more than altars. Lights dim, screens flash, and rehearsed voices boom with carefully practiced crescendos. But somewhere beneath the stunning spectacle, the holy hush is gone. The quiet awe, the trembling presence. The room may be full, but heaven feels far. It is not the excellence that troubles them, it is the exchange. Presence has been traded for polish, reverence replaced by relevance. Moments that once invited stillness now demand applause. The sacred space where one could Kneel and Weep has become a stage for choreography, branding, and curated emotional moments. For the chosen ones, it feels like walking into a room where God is mentioned often, but rarely waited on. His name is invoked, but his nearness is not invited. He is referenced like a celebrity from another age, spoken of with honor, yet strangely absent from the room that claims to gather in his name. And this loss is not visible to everyone. Many clap, sing, and leave satisfied. But the chosen ones carry a deeper ache. They know what it feels like when God comes close. The way the air thickens with eternity. How tears fall for no reason. How silence becomes more powerful than any sermon. They remember those moments. They live for them. But now, those moments are harder to find beneath layers of production and performance. They sit quietly while smoke machines fill the stage, wondering, when did the church become a theater? When did the altar become a backdrop? When did presence become an accessory to the show? For those with discerning spirits, the question is not about style, but substance. It is not about whether drums or choirs are used. It is about whether the atmosphere makes room for the divine. Can God interrupt the script? Can the service linger when heaven speaks? Or must everything be timed, trimmed, and transitioned? The chosen ones long for the wildness of the Spirit, for the kind of gathering where agendas break under the weight of glory, where the sermon is scrapped because the presence of God is too thick to speak. But in a culture obsessed with performance metrics and attention spans, such surrender is rare. So they begin to withdraw, not because they are offended, but because they are starving. They leave not because they are cynical, but because they are desperate. They have tasted something real, and now they can no longer feast on artificial fire. They yearn for the days when hearts burned, not just lights. When the floor shook with prayer, not bass. When people came looking for God, not just an experience that feels good for an hour and fades by Monday. Step 3. Painful judgment in the name of love. There is a wound that does not bleed, a silent aching that lives in the hearts of those who came to the church searching for healing but left carrying shame. The chosen ones, with their open wounds and honest struggles, walked through the doors expecting mercy but encountered something far colder, veiled in righteousness. They weren't looking for perfection, they were looking for belonging. But instead of grace, they met the sharp edge of judgment, wrapped in love's disguise. A handshake at the entrance, a smile from the pulpit, and behind it, an unspoken message. You are welcome here, as long as you become like us, quickly. The wound doesn't come from the sermon. It comes from the sideways glances, the hushed whispers, the pity disguised as prayer. It comes when someone's past becomes a topic for polite concern rather than quiet intercession. When addiction is treated like failure, not suffering. When divorce is met with suspicion, not compassion. When questions are labeled as rebellion and grief is corrected instead of held. The chosen ones feel it deeply because their hearts are tender, tuned to the frequency of truth. They see the contradiction in the way love is preached boldly, but rarely practiced in the margins, where real mess lives. The pain intensifies when this judgment arrives not in confrontation, but in the form of spiritual concern, a distortion far more dangerous. It is one thing to be told you are wrong. It is another to be quietly measured, diagnosed, and spiritually labeled by those who claim to love you. The chosen ones see through it. They know when words of encouragement are dipped in control. When "I'm praying for you" actually means "I disapprove of your process." They know the difference between correction that heals and control that silences. And so, little by little, they retreat. Not because they despise truth, but because they crave love that does not require pretending. Some came to the church after crawling out of dark places, abuse, addiction, betrayal. They entered fragile, hoping the church would be the arms of Christ, the balm for their breaking. But the community, often too focused on image, had no space for people who bleed visibly. Brokenness was tolerated as long as it was hidden. People who grieved too loudly, who questioned too boldly, who sinned too publicly, they disrupted the flow. You are too much. You are not enough. You don't belong here until you're better. This judgment is rarely spoken outright. That's what makes it so insidious. It hides behind smiles, behind fellowship, behind tough love. It shames in the name of holiness, excludes in the name of truth, and forgets that Jesus knelt with the woman caught in sin before he ever called her to change. The chosen ones remember this. They remember that love is patient, not performative. That truth without tenderness is not truth at all. And when they no longer find that reflection within the community that claimed to represent Christ, they are forced to step away. Step 4. Truth drowned by noise. There was a time when the church was a sanctuary for seekers, a sacred place where silence held as much power as speech, where truth was not shouted but revealed, slowly, like sunlight unfolding through stained glass. But now, for the chosen ones, those who yearn not for answers but for revelation, the silence has been drowned in a flood of sound. The sermons are louder, the programs are many, the messages are faster, the answers come too quickly, and the still, small voice of truth is barely heard beneath it all. They walk in with real questions, aching, soul-wrenching questions that were born in the dark night of the soul. Not the kind of questions that fit neatly into sermon outlines or are solved by motivational slogans. They ask with trembling voices, why does God feel far? Why did he allow this loss? What if I don't feel him anymore? But instead of holy silence or honest wrestling, they are met with cheerful noise, with spiritual sound bites, with overconfident theology that tries to fix what it cannot understand. The chosen ones don't need fixing, they need space. They need truth, spoken slowly, softly, soaked in humility. But in the modern church, truth has been reduced to a product, packaged, promoted and protected, not discovered, not encountered. And the noise is not just volume, it's pace. The constant pressure to be busy for God. The expectation to always be celebrating, always be advancing, always be victorious. There is no room to sit in lament, no space to question, no time to pause. The chosen ones, with their prophetic sensitivity, feel like strangers in a world where faith has become a performance and doubt is treated like disease. They long for truth that doesn't need to be sold, for truth that is uncomfortable, inconvenient, and untamed. The kind that disturbs before it comforts, the kind that convicts before it heals. But this kind of truth requires quiet, stillness, a slowing down that the machinery of church culture no longer knows how to do. In the rush to be relevant, churches have begun to entertain rather than enlighten. The messages are crafted with precision, yet often lack presence. The truth is spoken, but it is rushed, decorated, diluted, until it becomes palatable, predictable, and powerless. For the chosen ones, truth is not something to agree with. It is something to encounter, something that demands a response, not applause. And when that kind of truth disappears, the kind that shakes foundations, the kind that makes a man weep without knowing why, they feel the loss more deeply than words can express. They remember a time when truth lingered like incense in the air, when it wasn't about 3 steps to success, but 1 step closer to the throne, when people came to weep, not to win, when the word of God was not used to defend the institution, but to break hearts open. And now, in its absence, step 5, God moved, but the church stayed. There is a deep tragedy in realizing that the one you came to worship has already moved on, and no one seemed to notice. The chosen ones, whose spirits are finely tuned to the presence of God, begin to feel the ache of this dislocation long before they can name it. They sit in sanctuaries built for him, listen to words spoken about him, sing songs written to him. And yet something is missing. Not emotionally, not stylistically, but spiritually. The atmosphere feels like an echo. The rituals continue, but the life behind them has faded. God, in his ever-moving nature, has shifted, and the church, in its love for what is familiar, has stayed behind. The chosen ones don't leave because they are disloyal. They leave because they follow. They follow the cloud, the fire, the breath, the unpredictable rhythm of a God who refuses to be systemized. And that is the tension. God is not static. He moves through seasons, through culture, through people, through pain. But the church, once a living organism, often becomes an institution that resists that movement. It becomes more committed to preservation than transformation. The pews are in order, the bulletin is printed, the program is practiced. But the Spirit has already moved on to places unprepared, to people untouched, to spaces unapproved. There was a time when the church led the move of God. Now, in many places, it lags behind it, suspicious of what it cannot control, fearful of what it cannot explain. The chosen ones sense this deeply. They feel the dissonance when God begins stirring something new, a new way of gathering, a new expression of worship, a new outpouring among the unseen and the uncelebrated. And the church responds not with openness, but with resistance. The movement of God is labeled dangerous, divisive, or too emotional, and so it is dismissed. Meanwhile, the hungry are drawn to the fringes, where the fire has landed, uninvited by the gatekeepers of tradition. The chosen ones are not attracted to novelty. They are not chasing trends or spiritual excitement. They are chasing God, and when he leads them outside the camp, beyond the border of the familiar, they follow, even if it costs them community, reputation, or comfort. They follow into quiet living rooms, where prayers rise like incense, into broken spaces where authenticity has more power than eloquence, into fields and forests where tears and silence become their new liturgy. And while some call them rebellious or lost, they know in their bones that God is no longer where he once was, and that staying behind, out of loyalty to a system, would be disloyalty to the Spirit. What breaks their hearts is not the departure itself, but the indifference of those they once stood beside. The ones who don't feel the absence. The ones still clapping on cue, still repeating what was once anointed, but is now just routine. The chosen. Ones feel like strangers in a story they used to love, a story that once moved with power, with fire, with presence. But now the pages are still, the ink is dry, and while the story is still being told every Sunday, they know in their spirit that the author is writing a new chapter somewhere else. So they gather their courage, they bless what was, and they begin to walk, not away from God, but toward him, wherever he has gone. Step 6. The wilderness is now holy ground. For those who have walked away from the familiar glow of stained glass and polished pulpits, the wilderness is not a place of rebellion. It is a place of revelation. The chosen ones did not plan to end up there. They were driven not by bitterness, but by a quiet call that could no longer be ignored, a call that echoed deeper than sermons, more intimate than fellowship, more persistent than fear. They stepped outside the walls, hearts trembling, not because they no longer believed, but because their belief demanded something real, something raw, something that could no longer be found inside the controlled safety of church culture. And as they wandered, uncertain and unseen, they began to discover that what once felt like exile had been holy appointment all along. The wilderness strips away the noise. It takes away the certainty, the applause, the structure. It forces the soul to walk barefoot on sacred ground, ground that looks like confusion, grief, silence, and solitude. But it is in that bareness that the chosen ones begin to hear again. Not the voice of religion, not the voice of guilt, but the whisper of the divine, unfiltered, unbranded, untamed. In the wilderness, God is not scheduled. He is not wrapped in lights or confined to a stage. He is wind in the trees. He is weeping in the night. He is the soft, invisible presence beside the one who no longer knows how to pray, but still aches to be held. There is no performance in the wilderness. There is no image to protect, no ministry to maintain. The only altar is the heart itself, cracked and open, offered without pretense. And it is here, in this uncurated space, that the chosen ones encounter something they had nearly forgotten. God is not fragile. He is not offended by their questions. He is not distant because of their doubts. He is not waiting for them to clean up before showing up. He meets them in the mess. In the absence of applause, they find his affection. In the quiet of isolation, they discover intimacy. And in the broken rhythms of their untamed journey, they realize that the wilderness has become the most honest church they've ever known. What once felt like being lost now feels like being led, not toward a destination, but into a transformation. The chosen ones begin to understand that holy ground is not always found beneath vaulted ceilings and stained glass light. Sometimes it is found in the wilderness, under the open sky, in the silence between sobs, in the pages of a journal written with trembling hands, in the breath between questions that have no answers. And though they may walk alone, they walk with someone who never required perfection, only presence. So if you've felt the shift, if the place that once felt sacred now feels strangely silent, if your spirit aches for something deeper, something truer, you're not backsliding. You're being called. You are not alone in the wilderness. You are not faithless because you stopped going. You are not broken because the system no longer feeds you. You are being drawn beyond the noise, beyond the judgment, beyond the walls, into a place where God still walks in the cool of the day and speaks not in thunder, but in whispers. Maybe the church didn't fail you. Maybe it simply finished its role in your story, and maybe, just maybe, the departure wasn't rebellion, but obedience to a voice no one else could hear but you. So walk on, chosen one. Let the wilderness become your sanctuary. Let the silence become your teacher. And know this, God has not left you. He has just moved and invited you to follow.